The bystanders were all shocked by what they had witnessed that day. They asked themselves what they had seen and what had happened. Sahaku, along with his members from the Heretic Inquisitors, had been defeated by Zephyr. Sahaku was filled with anger and couldn't help but curse Zephyr for his actions. However, Zephyr simply turned around and walked away, thinking to himself that Sahaku was being too loud. After defeating Sahaku's party, Zephyr had completed the first step of his plan. The only concern remaining was when the man would hear the news of what had transpired that day, but Zephyr was confident that it would only be a matter of days. As he walked, however, he suddenly fell to the ground and experienced a sensation of being unable to move, not even his fingers. His body was overcome with tension and aches, and in that moment, Zephyr realized what was happening to him, and it was mana freezing. Mana freezing was a temporary side effect that occurred when a mana user depleted their mana, resulting in pain and tension. Since Zephyr had used that technique, he depleted his mana faster than he anticipated. Despite increasing his mana capacity, his body from 10 years ago could only handle so much. As a result, Zephyr found himself in a dire situation because the mana freezing was about to trigger the collection process. Zephyr had not yet recovered from the effects of mana freezing when the spirit Shylock appeared before him, acting under the authority of the god of Lone, Uzra. It was confirmed that Zephyr's mana had reached 0, and as a result, the skill Wall of Iron would initiate its collection process. The Wall of Iron skill wasn't just a skill that increased defense and endurance. In reality, when the skill was used, fatigue and damage would accumulate like a debt. When the user's mana reached 0, the accumulated damage would be repaid in full, much like a debt to a loan shark. Many adventurers had used this skill to challenge higher-level dungeons, only to meet an untimely death. Uzra, the god of loans, was a double-edged sword that thrived on the desperation of humans. Zephyr was certain that the god of loans Uzra was drooling as he observed Zephyr's fight, and Zephyr's intuition was correct. Uzra was indeed watching him. The spirit began calculating the accumulated damages from the user, and once it finished its calculations, the countdown suddenly started. In Zephyr's mind, he felt his body was too heavy, and he desperately needed to move in order to resolve this situation. Unfortunately, Zephyr was unable to move his body at all, causing him to fall to the ground. However, he remembered the emergency recovery potion that he had hidden under the bandages on his wrist. As the god of loans smiled and began the collection process, a large chain swiftly descended towards Zephyr's position. Zephyr quickly drank the recovery potion, and because of this, the countdown for collection was cancelled because his mana count increased from 0 to 1. After that, the spirit informed him that the collection activity had been postponed until next time, and because of that Zephyr couldn't help but show a little smile, while saying that Uzra had underestimated him for thinking that he wouldn't be prepared for such situations. Zephyr was a seasoned professional who had managed to survive for a year, even after the extinction of humans. He stated that it wasn't difficult to avoid the lone god's collection, as long as he was skilled at managing his magic. The Wall of Iron was the best and safest skill that allowed him to make the most of his mana. In Zephyr's past, this skill cost around 500 gold, which was considered expensive for any skill. It was a popular skill among reckless individuals who rushed into action. Nevertheless, it was a skill that was far too expensive for someone in his current situation. With a cursing finger, he expressed his gratitude to the lone god that is watching him from above. After the cancelled collection, the lone god was filled with rage, and he even killed the poor tortoise in his hands in the process. After the collection event, Zephyr woke up and found himself in an unfamiliar location. He questioned if he had lost consciousness and wondered where he was. To his surprise, a temple believer addressed him as a customer and asked if he had slept well. Zephyr quickly realized that he was lying on a bed with his hands and feet tied. He couldn't help but ask the sister what was going on. The sister reassured him not to worry and explained that he was in her workplace. She mentioned that he seemed quite exhausted, as he had been sound asleep. She informed him that he had overslept, and as a result, the loan period had exceeded the agreed time by 1 hour. While questioning his sanity, the sister reached for a knife placed beside her. She expressed that she had overheard everything including his reckless actions that put their collateral at risk. She emphasized that he had also incurred interest. If he continued to behave in this manner, the believers would have no reason to believe that he would repay his loan to them. The sister abruptly picked up the knife and pointed close to Zephyr's eyes and demanded to know if he intended to pay them or not. Zephyr in that moment realized that he also had a debt to settle there. If he were to use magic now, the lone god's collection would commence once more. He had no option but to resolve the situation through words. He swiftly informed the sister that his dungeon clearance reward would be paid in a week and pleaded with her to wait until then. In response, the sister retorted that it was obvious they would be taking all of that reward. She then questioned him about the daily loans he had taken at the store and the outstanding interest payments he hadn't settled. How would Zephyr manage to repay the accumulated interest with just the dungeon clearance? She had heard it was a cobalt lair dungeon and inquired how on earth he expected to pay off his debts with that. She suggested they take his organs immediately. Instructing her slaves to untie Zephyr, they positioned his hands on the table. With a wicked smile, the sister informed Zephyr that they would begin by cutting off one of his fingers, as she believed that once he witnessed it, he would come to his senses that the temple is not that easily to be overlooked. Zephyr shouted and pleaded with her to wait, all the while trying to recall the name of the sister. Despite his pleas, she commanded the slaves to proceed with cutting off one of Zephyr's fingers. In a desperate attempt, Zephyr uttered something to her that made her halt the process and inquire about his identity. The sister was shocked by what she heard from Zephyr, and as a result, the slaves couldn't help but inquire if there was a problem. Reacting swiftly, she instructed the slaves to leave the room. They promptly exited, leaving the sister alone with Zephyr. She placed her hands beside Zephyr's head and demanded that he tell her the truth about how he knew the name he had mentioned earlier. In response, Zephyr explained that it would be impossible not to know that name, or rather, he should refer to her as the monster broker White Rose. Anna Primrose, a sister of the Shrine of Light, was also known by her other persona, the broker White Rose. As the broker White Rose, she had connections with the underworld and engaged in the trade of monster corpses, equipment, and information relating to individuals. It was a daring endeavor to attempt clearing a raid dungeon with only the cheap equipment available from hunters. That's why Zephyr had planned to negotiate with the sister to acquire better gear. He explained to her that he had been on his way to find her, and he was delighted that she had found him instead. As she listened to his words, she was left speechless. Zephyr then requested to be untied, as it would be awkward to negotiate while lying on the bed. He emphasized the importance of having a productive discussion between the two of them. Meanwhile, in the hospital, Sahaku was consumed by anger and unable to eat the food served to him. The memory of Zephyr belittling him and walking away lingered in his mind. Determined to seek revenge and erase the embarrassment he felt, Sahaku vowed to kill Zephyr by any means necessary. Lost in thoughts of revenge, Sahaku was interrupted by the entrance of a man named Ned. He then inquired about the commotion and who had caused a scene in the hospital. Sahaku quickly asked Ned why he had come. In response, Ned instructed Sahaku to lie down and asked the healers to leave the room temporarily as he would handle the situation. Ned began recounting the stories that he had heard about Sahaku's recent experiences. Sahaku immediately lowered his head and apologized to Ned, acknowledging his mistake and reassuring him that there was no need to worry about what had happened. To Sahaku's surprise, Ned abruptly pressed the blade of his knife against Sahaku's mouth, demanding an explanation as to why he shouldn't be worried. Ned pointed out that throughout the entire day and night, every person he encountered couldn't stop talking about it. He revealed that Lord Matthias had always warned him against bringing shame upon their group. Yet, Sahaku had shamefully acted out in front of the other slaves and was beaten like a worthless dog. Fueled by anger, Ned swiftly sliced Sahaku's mouth, punishing him for his actions. Ned speculated that Sahaku's ability to get away with such behavior was due to people's lowered expectations of him. Initially, when Sahaku had discovered the demon god worshipper, Ned had believed Sahaku possessed special talents. However, within the past 6 months, Sahaku had only managed to find 2 additional worshippers, including the one from before. Ned expressed the upper echelon's growing frustration, questioning how much longer they had to tolerate Sahaku's behavior. especially now that he had made their revered department a laughingstock in front of everyone. Upon hearing Ned's words, Sahaku immediately prostrated himself on the floor, pleading for a second chance and vowing to do whatever it takes. Ned, unmoved by Sahaku's pleas, simply responded that they would stick to their usual course of action. He emphasized that they wouldn't allow those who brought shame upon them to live, and the consequences for Sahaku would be determined after he completed the task assigned to him. In Sahaku's mind, he realized that if he failed to fulfill the task, it would result in the stripping of his crimson uniform, a symbol of his status. Ned handed Sahaku an item that belonged to a captured demon god worshipper, leaving Sahaku in shock at the sight of it. Ned explained that the item was found in the room where the worshippers were held, and it was now Sahaku's decision whether to use it or not. However, Ned warned Sahaku that he didn't have the luxury of choosing the means to accomplish the task, and advised him to make a decision he wouldn't regret. Sahaku, known as the notorious dog, the enemy of all hunters, the shrine had witnessed the deaths of 26 hunters at his hands in the past year. To return to a life of slavery after all this time was akin to inviting his own deaths at the hands of the slaves. In Sahaku's thoughts, his life had finally taken a turn for the better. He had managed to escape his miserable existence and rise above it. He couldn't allow everything to come crashing down now. It wasn't his own life that needed to end, but rather Zephyr's. After Ned went out, he heard Sahaku's devilish laugh coming from the room through the hallway. He instructed the man who was standing watch to keep a close eye on Sahaku to ensure he didn't cause any trouble. The man agreed to Ned's instructions. Ned also emphasized the importance of people understanding their situation from an objective perspective, so they wouldn't end up discarded like Sahaku. Talent, Ned scoffed at the notion, stating that Sahaku didn't grasp the true reason they had taken him in. The man then responded to Ned, saying that he should be grateful to Sahaku because his doing had diverted the knight's suspicions away from them. In Ned's thoughts, their plan involved infiltrating the shrine knights during their dungeon raid. They saw it as an opportunity to eliminate the shrine knight captain, who was present inside the dungeon. Furthermore, they aimed to seize control of the 3rd District Shrine of Light in the name of the demon god. This man's name and true identity is Ned Stryer, one of the officials from the disciples of the demon god worshippers. It was an important mission that would change the dominion of the demon god religious order, and Ned could not allow any kind of disturbances. He then instructed the man to also investigate a guy named Zephyr. The reason for this was that Zephyr was using the same martial arts technique as their schools. The only people who knew that martial arts were Ned's master and the 4 brothers, including himself. Ned couldn't help but ask himself if Zephyr was sent by his master. And if that was the case, why didn't Zephyr contact them through the proper means? Ned was suspicious of Zephyr, but he couldn't approach him recklessly and risk leaking their information. That's why he used Sahaku to confirm it. If Ned found out that Zephyr was not on their side, he would simply need to eliminate him. Meanwhile, the sister couldn't believe what she was seeing. She thought Zephyr was just crazy, but witnessing the predator before her eyes was incredible. Zephyr then asked the sister if she enjoyed it, and she quickly replied, saying she fucking loved it. However, the sister began organizing the items that Zephyr wanted to sell and purchase. Zephyr was selling the predator's corpse, which was in no magical store, damaged partially. On the other hand, Zephyr wanted to purchase the advanced holy enchanter, a rosary engraved with miracles, salamander stones, and so on. After organizing the list, the sister informed Zephyr that there was nothing on the list they couldn't obtain. However, the issue was the cost. It would amount to approximately 5,000 gold. Zephyr needed to capture 3 more predators. Calmly, Zephyr assured the sister that it wouldn't be a problem. He would have them ready within 3 weeks, and requested that she ensure the items he had requested would be prepared by then. However, Zephyr had another favor to ask. At a dining establishment where Zephyr and Goth's team were having a meal, their leader, Goth, suggested that they reintroduce themselves despite having met before. He began by introducing their frontliner, Marco, highlighting his skills. Next, he introduced Dale, who had only been with the team for 3 months but had already proven himself noteworthy. Lastly, he introduced the newcomer they were all excited about, Zephyr. With the introductions completed, Goth encouraged everyone to enjoy their meal. However, The expressions on his team members' faces did not reflect a cheerful mood. In Goth's thoughts, he pondered what could be troubling his teammates. They should be trying to uplift the mood, considering that Zephyr would prove to be a great help to them in the future. However, Marco was unsure of what to do, and he believes that Zephyr didn't like them. He wondered if it was because their welcoming ceremony wasn't grand enough. Despite his efforts to provide good food, it was difficult for them, as they also had debts to pay. To their surprise, Zephyr broke the silence by grabbing a bottle of alcohol from his bag. He boldly stated that he didn't drink horse's piss. The three men were all amazed by what they saw, and couldn't help but ask Zephyr how he managed to acquire such a beverage in a shabby town like theirs. It was the alcohol that he obtained from White Rose, a luxury that slaves like them could only dream of. Zephyr then invited them to have a shot, expressing that he would be relying on them from now on. They replied, stating that Zephyr was nicer than they had initially thought. Because of this, Zephyr will sure to deliver results with their help, and in return, they would assist him by dealing with the monsters in the area. Whether Zephyr liked it or not, they were all in the same boat until the raid. Since Zephyr and Goth were on the same team prior to his regression, he already knew how to handle Goth, and he simply needed someone to guide him in improving. However, the other two members were no longer alive at this point in time, so he didn't know much about them. This left Zephyr torn between whether he should try to work with them or dispose of them immediately. Nevertheless, Zephyr had enough time to figure it out. When it comes to humans, they tend to favor those who can fulfill their desires and requirements, offering money to those who seek wealth, delivering outcomes to those aspiring for success, and showing respect to those who are proud of themselves. However, there are always exceptions to these rules. Even so, Zephyr is not the type of person to be kind to those who consistently challenge him. However, Dale doesn't seem to like Zephyr. He recalls what their leader, Goth, mentioned in the infirmary. He emphasized, for example, he was at level 4, and while they were at level 5, he then asked them if they understand that even a difference of 1 level affects how they were treated by others. Goth requested that both Dale and Marco would get along with Zephyr and extend a warm welcome when he arrives. Marco replied to Goth, questioning him that how a minor could possibly save them, and why Goth was now making a deal with Zephyr. Dale, on the other hand, acknowledged Goth's authority as their leader, but expressed his opinion that it would have been better if Goth had discussed it with them beforehand. Dale also shared his skepticism, and suggesting that Zephyr was merely lucky, and made it seem like he had done all the work while they were knocked out. He found it hard to believe that a minor could have killed a predator. Goth chuckled and asked Dale who had actually killed the predator, implying that it was Zephyr. Dale then brought up the potential consequences of their deal, highlighting the risks of being caught and the potential for imprisonment or even execution. Marco then warned them to stop arguing, as their conversation could potentially be overheard. He reminded them that they had already made the decision to include Zephyr in their squad, and they had also agreed to share the rewards among the three of them. Therefore, Marco believed it wasn't a bad idea to proceed with their plan and suggested that they allow things to unfold naturally for the time being. However, in Dale's thoughts, he still couldn't accept it, even if the self-proclaimed leader had already made his decision, and the other one had been swayed by alcohol. Dale still didn't trust Zephyr. How dare he try to secure a place among their ranks? Dale believed that the truth about what had truly happened would become apparent with time. Scammers like Zephyr wouldn't last long anyway. That's the nature of hunters, and the dungeon would teach him that lesson. The four of them arrived at the cave town of Adeline. This town had been built hundreds of years ago, with homes constructed within the mountains. Marco was shocked to discover that there was such a place just 2 days away from the temple. Dale found it intriguing that the houses they saw were where people actually lived. In response, Goth explained that the interiors of the houses were even better, with living rooms, kitchens, and guest rooms equipped with everything one could imagine. He mentioned that when people were sent in this direction from the temple or needed to treat others, they would stay at the inns here. Goth himself had stayed here when he was still a newbie. Marco couldn't help but remark that Goth should have brought him here back then. Curiously, Marco asked why Goth only chose to bring them now to this place when it became a monster's nest. After a while, Zephyr and his squad arrived at a cave inhabited by monsters. They could see spider webs both near the entrance and inside. Upon entering, Zephyr activated his mana detection skill. He spread his mana outward from his body and through the ground, extending the range of his senses. With this ability, he could sense the shapes of objects within his detection radius, detect any sudden movements, and even sense objects infused with magical power, as if he were physically touching them. Just before entering the cave, Zephyr gave them a briefing, informing them about the monsters inside are called black steel spiders. Dale asked Zephyr if those were the monsters they would encounter. Zephyr confirmed it, mentioning that they could also tell from the signs left near the entrance. Now Zephyr explained their plan, stating that they would move through the dungeon without touching the spiderwebs to reach the hole where the baby spiders were located. They would then pour the paralyzing potion into the hole and wait until the spiders were easily killable. Zephyr also mentioned that it wouldn't be easy for him to maintain his mana detection skill while inside. However, during his explanation, Dale interrupted and questioned whether it mattered if it was difficult or not. He also asked if Zephyr was certain that the monsters inside were black steel spiders, as it would be impossible for the four of them to clear the dungeon. Black steel spiders are spider-like monsters, with hard steel-like shells covering their bodies. They possess formidable offensive and defensive capabilities. However, what makes them even more challenging is their rapid rate of reproduction, and leading to densely populated nests. Dealing with a nest of black steel spiders is far more difficult than confronting a single mature predator. Dale also voiced his concern, stating that it is not a place where the four of them can deal with. He suggested that they should retreat and report the situation, and at least come back with a properly trained combat crew. However, Zephyr responded that it was a valid suggestion. Dale was perplexed by Zephyr's words. Zephyr further explained that if Dale lacked confidence, he wouldn't force him to join them because Zephyr believed he could clear the dungeon by himself. Dale didn't expect Zephyr to come up with such a claim, but he was grateful for it because it confirmed his suspicions about Zephyr being a scammer, solo hunting a predator and engaging in a duel with the heresy examiner Sahaku were both feats that Dale had never witnessed. He believed that Zephyr's confidence in clearing the black steel spider dungeon alone only means that the dungeon might not be as dangerous as it appeared. Zephyr probably think they would follow him. Despite the precautions he told them, Dale wondered how long Zephyr could maintain his charade. With a deliberate gesture, Dale touched one of the webs. To Dale's surprise, the spider web that touched his gloves proved difficult to remove. He realized he was in a precarious situation as he witnessed the spiders closing in on him. One of the spiders leaped forward, launching an attack at Dale. Fortunately, Zephyr detected the imminent danger and swiftly pulled Dale out of harm's way. The spiders redirected their aggression towards Zephyr, attempting to bite his arms.